My name is Casey Mulholland. I'm the founder and lead developer at Kinetic Pro in Tampa, Florida. For the last 4 years, we've built a series of products focused on improving the way pitchers experience their daily routines. Today, our company's player app, Connect, powers some of the top players and organizations in the game. It's been a long process getting these products to the market, but we're excited about how big of an opportunity these products have to change the way the industry looks at player development. I hear this story a lot. Top-ranked player to miss the draft due to elbow injury, Tommy John. This story always stops me dead in my tracks because it hits close to home. I was that top-ranked player at one time, and 60 days before potentially becoming a first-round draft pick, I was under the knife getting the infamous Tommy John surgery. Every few years, someone compiles all the research and tells the same story. The Tommy John surgery is continuing to happen at an alarming rate. Today we're going to talk about this problem, Tommy John. We'll then talk about some of the flaws in our overuse prevention models, pitch counts. And lastly, we're going to explore a better method to measuring the value of a single throw. To wrap this up today, I'll be reviewing what it looks like to apply workload management and how we scale it athlete to athlete via our Connect app. So let's dive in. So it's clear, Tommy John surgeries are still happening at a very high rate in the game, but the question still stands. What causes them? And furthermore, how do we lower the risk of having Tommy John surgery player to player? To answer this, let's start with what potentially causes Tommy John surgery. A simple equation I like to use for injuries is this. When load is greater than tissue tolerance, it equals injury. When throwing, our UCL, the ulnar collateral ligament, gets put under great stress during the throwing motion. Just before max external rotation, the UCL experiences peak valgus torque. This peak valgus torque is seen to be about 60 plus Newton meter in most high intensity throws player to player. The problem we see in research is peak valgus load on the UCL is roughly 34 Newton meters before full rupture in cadaver studies. This means that 34 Newton meters alone placed on the UCL is seen to be enough to fully tear the UCL. So how is this possible? How can peak valgus torque in a single throw surpass the valgus torque needed to rupture a UCL fully? When we throw, our forearm flexors contract to stabilize the elbow and distribute stress, which ultimately protects the UCL. These muscles that make up the forearm flexors are our defense against the load we face throw over throw. Their aid in distribution of force means that the load does not exceed tissue tolerance throw to throw. However, as these muscles fatigue, they do not function as well stabilizing the elbow and thus leaving the load on the UCL to be greater. This greater load on the UCL ultimately leads to a UCL that's more susceptible to injury. So there we have it. We just have to not overuse the forearm musculature. We won't have Tommy John surgery, right? There's an overwhelming amount of research that cites overuse as the main cause of UCL injury. However, the problem we face defining overuse is a little more complex than it seems. Beyond just defining it, we need to make actionable recommendations on how to avoid it daily with our athletes. Let's be clear about the goal of workload management and throwing. Our goal is to design better throwing programs that prevent overuse and encourage an enjoyable user experience. Ultimately, achieving both of these together, we mitigate injury risk by mitigating fatigue. Anything less than both of these being accomplished, we would have to define as an industry-wide failure. So how do we do this? It starts with identifying the model we are currently using to mitigate fatigue to stop overuse. It's just not working. Pitch counts, though well-intentioned, are a massive problem in our game today. When talking about pitch counts, I like to reference a study called Unaccounted Workload Factor Game Day Pitch Counts in High School Baseball Pitchers. It's an observational study. In this study, they observed 13,769 pitches from Florida-based high school athletes and concluded that only nearly half, 57% of the pitches on a game day are what we call pitch counts. The other half of these pitches were from bullpen and warm-up pitches between innings. This means using only pitches on a game day, we are making decisions on an athlete's readiness to pitch from only half of the pitching-specific activity that they did that day. It's important to note that in this study, they didn't account for warm-up throws. They didn't account for plyo-care throws or even an athlete playing another position. The study also didn't account for the throwing that happens on non-game days. We cannot overlook the importance of all of these throws and the potential impacts on fatigue. When we begin to account for all of these throws, we can begin to see that pitch counts amass for substantially less than 50% of our total throwing, but dictate whether or not an athlete should be pitching all the way down to the lowest levels of our game. This is extremely problematic, as other research has identified amateur injury as an indicator for additional future injury, meaning that if you have an injury when you're young, you're more likely to have another injury or more serious injury when you get older. So it's clear pitch counts are a problem, and they lack the overall insight to protect our athletes from fatigue. But what's the alternative? What does it look like to propose a better model to account for all the throwing and to more accurately measure the value of all throws? Let's begin to answer this by identifying the factors that can impact fatigue on the forearm flexors and throwing. Number one, our first fatigue factor, is how fast the arm is moving, arm speed. It's been noted that the harder the athlete throws, the greater the force is on the elbow. This means that arm speed is an important factor in measuring the value of a single throw. Number two, the position the arm is in. Elbow flexion just before max external rotation. Studies show that elbow flexion just prior to MER is indicative to the measure of higher or lower valgus torque. Number three, the size of the body. Body type. An athlete with longer limbs is impacted differently than an athlete with shorter limbs when it comes to overall forces imparted on the medial elbow. And lastly, number four, the time you have to rest and recover pitch to pitch, time between throws. It has been highly published that less time between throws means the body has less time to replenish needed energy stores, thus inducing fatigue quicker. When looking at our current model of measuring load in pitchers with pitch counts, we can quickly identify that we assume all throws are equal. So even if we overlook the fact that pitch counts were substantially less than 50% of our total throws on a game day, we would still be left with the problem of identifying all throws as being the exact same as they pertain to stress on the athlete and fatigue. By accounting for all four of the aforementioned categories in a single throw, though, we can identify the value of a single throw more appropriately as it pertains to the individual athlete's fatigue. It's impossible to do this by hand, obviously. So how can we account for this seamlessly in an athlete's training day? Enter our latest product release, the KP Sleeve. Let's look at an example of how it calculates throwing and addresses the problem by leveraging technology. To start, I simply connect my sleeve and put it on. Then I begin my throwing. So throw number one is made. Let's say I throw it really light. The sleeve quickly calculates my exertion and produces a value, a lower value in this case. Throw number two is made. I throw a little harder than throw number one. The sleeve will quickly calculate my exertion and it produces a value just a little bit higher than throw number one. Throw number three is made. I throw it a little harder. The sleeve quickly calculates my exertion and again produces a bit higher value than number two. As the day goes on, athletes typically make 50 to 250 throws. Our sleeve can capture all of these throws in real time with no additional work on the athlete or the coach. As the session goes on, our sleeve adds together all of our throwing value and provides us total exertion values for today. Instead of saying this athlete threw 30 pitches, we can rebuild that statement with the sleeve, and we can better represent the total work the athlete did today. We could instead say the athlete threw a 20 workload. This changes the way we see daily value of work athlete to athlete and allows us to better understand the ramifications of the work of each individual athlete's potential to be fatigued. To some of you who have never heard this before, I'm sure all of this sounds extremely new and drastically different from the current approach of pitch counts. For all the aforementioned reasons, it's clear to see why this approach provides us a better model, but so many have gotten comfortable with identifying pitch counts due to the simplicity of the process. It's often exaggerated that tracking and throwing workload with tech isn't scalable. I've heard all the reasons why it doesn't work, but let me be extremely clear here. The issue is a user experience and technology issue, not a measurement and philosophy issue. If workload required the same actions from a coach or parent, we would all agree that the workload model is far better and would unanimously choose to use it over pitch counts any day of the week. Our goal with KP is to break away from pitch counts as an industry and begin to influence better decision making by coaches, players, and parents. We want to help shape a healthier future where the measures of exertion pitcher to pitcher are more accurate, thus hopefully creating a healthier next generation of pitchers. We know we can change the way workload is looked at and reshape how it's understood. Remember though, workload management is seen as foreign today, and that's okay. A pitch counting methodology and rule base was once seen as also being foreign when it was adopted. We need the change, and it's obvious the opportunity to grow change within the game is actually here today. Okay, so we've now covered the anatomy of an injury. We've established why pitch counts don't work. With all of that being said, let's talk about our process and explain how our technology, the KP Sleeve, works to create throwing programs that individually fit your needs. Oftentimes, people consider workload to be about how much we should restrict the player from doing today. Reality is, we should see throwing workload to be less about being restrictive and more about building the athlete appropriately to reach the needed work we require from them. Research has showed at the MLB level, this is the number one mistake that gets made year over year. Athletes don't get to the first week of season with enough throwing fitness. They become fatigued, and they go down to injury. April has been proven to be the highest incident rate of injury year over year in the MLB. Remember, when load is greater than tissue tolerance, we see injury occur. So knowing this, it's important we start each athlete on a throwing program with the appropriate load. When building our sleeve, we identified a process was needed to produce an accurate assessment of each athlete's individual throwing fitness. To start, in the application section of our discussion today, let's explore the throwing fitness assessment athletes conduct when first getting started with the KP sleeve. So we established earlier how we calculate a daily exertion value. We take 4 key measures per throw and establish a single throw value. We then sum that up to establish the day's throwing work value, or as we like to call it, an athlete's daily exertion. Now, in order to determine how much throwing fitness this athlete has built up, we need to know the last 28 days of this athlete's throwing. Generally speaking, what we are asking our athlete is, how much throwing have you been doing the last month? This is what our system will figure out, and throwing fitness is what it will value. To do this, we offer 2 options to accurately establish your throwing fitness. Option 1 is a 28-day questionnaire. Athletes in this option fill out an approximate amount of throwing that they've done at each RPE, 10% to 100% daily. The secret here is that behind the RPE scores, they are projected exertion scores. After the athlete has filled out their daily throwing for the last 28 days, we can accurately project a fitness level for that athlete. Option 2 is a 7-day active onboarding. Athletes in this option simply throw with the sleeve on and perform their throwing routine for the week. The sleeve tracks daily exertion and showcases it to the athlete through the 7 days onboarding process. Once complete, our system slopes and projects what your approximate throwing fitness would be if you had built up over the last 28 days appropriately leading into and through your onboarding week. Once we have established your throwing fitness, you can pick your throwing program, and we can appropriately place you on the selected program to begin to make optimal throwing recommendations. Linear throwing programs and routines have been used in the game for as far back as most can remember. Typically, an athlete is given a piece of paper where a duration of time is in place and a progressive overload model has been built. Athletes often struggle to stay on these models over time due to an ever-changing schedule and accidental shifts in daily training. This leads to players guessing how much they should be doing and what schedule they should reconstruct to be ready for season. Athletes are often over or undertrained during these programs. There's no way to quantify how built up the athlete is, and though they are seen as progressive overload, there's often nothing progressive about them. The only way to stop over or undertraining is to utilize a fully dynamic model. The software we have paired with the KP Sleeve is truly baseball's first dynamic throwing program. Over the last 4 years, I've been constructing and storing throwing programs. Our system contains hundreds of throwing programs that represent applicable 4-month models. Thanks to all of these models, you're able to design any throwing program format with any day combination via our throwing module in our Connect app. It's simple. Once we have your throwing fitness from our assessment and you've selected your desired throwing routine, we are able to build you a throwing program that will appropriately progress your throwing fitness to assure you are reaching your needed throwing fitness in the right amount of time. Following this process, no athlete should be underprepared for opening day again. No org should be blind on whether an athlete is ready for opening day or not. With the dynamic training model, questions can be answered long before load exceeds tissue tolerance. Come down to KP, and you'll hear communication coach to athlete or player to player that you might not fully comprehend in your first visit. Athletes will ask something along these lines. Hey coach, the Connect app says I got a 10 today. You want me to get up to like an 8 with a long toss and then close the rest with a short box? Athletes define their daily work by segments of workloads and communicate their desire to work around these workloads in their training process. We see over 250 athletes a year. all comfortable with this language. So you want to tell me again that workload isn't scalable? Once the athlete has been through our assessment process and built their desired throwing routine, it's time to train. Training with the KP sleeve is seamless. If the athlete knew nothing else, they could simply put on the sleeve, connect it, and throw until the recommended workload wheel is closed. In real time, the athlete can record their throws and know exactly when they have hit their needed throwing amount for that day. For those athletes that like autonomy and are looking to plan to optimize their training schedule, they can dive into our projected workload page. On this page, the athlete will be shown a white line and green bars on a graph. Simply stated, the white line is the max allowed exertion for the day before an athlete would be deemed to be fatigued. The green bars represent our recommended throwing schedule based on your requested throwing routine. Both of these features are created and governed by more advanced philosophies such as AC ratio, prior peak exertion maxes, and our very own filtering systems that correct for unrealistic recommendations to assure your program is applicable daily for your training needs. One of the best things about this page is the control of today's workload. By scrolling the wheel at the top of the page, you can not only set different workloads than what is recommended, but you can also see the ramifications of that change in the days ahead on your schedule. This app layout and design solves for some of the biggest issues facing our industry today. Players across the game are leading into this process with us, and it's changing the way they see their development while fueling their performance. With that, we've covered it all. The problem of Tommy John surgery in our game, the issues with pitch counts, why measuring a single throw's value needs to change, how to assess throwing fitness, how to program with our Connect app, and finally, how easy it is to train with our KP sleeve. It's easy to see there's a perpetual problem in the game today. It's easy to see we have a solution that can fundamentally change the industry and substantially reduce the risk of injury. The question is, will you be the one to stand behind it and leave a lasting impact on the next generation? Or will you let this opportunity pass and stand idle as injury continues to turn the lights out on some of the brightest careers? For more on our products and to dive deeper into our materials surrounding both our products and philosophies, be sure to check out our website, kineticprobaseball.com. May 15th, 2023, we'll be launching an extended throwing workload course that expands on many of the discussed processes and philosophies mentioned today. This will be hosted on our Connect EDU platform, which is designed to educate you on the power of our Connect app. Our throwing module, Winning with Workload, will be joining the KP Bands module, The Future of Arm Care, as offered courses available to the public. Connect EDU can be found on our website, kineticprobaseball.com. If you're interested in getting started with a KP sleeve, be sure to reach out to our team via email, support@kineticprobaseball.com. All sales are currently through organizational structure or for KP athletes. Lastly, be sure to check us out on YouTube for regular free content and updates on our products.